Well, I suppose this is adequate, my mother-in-law, Margaret, said, delicately placing her fork beside her barely touched plate of beef bourguignon. Though in our family, we typically serve something more refined. Her emphasis on our family made it clear that even after 7 years of marriage to her son, I still wasn't truly part of it. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and at 34, I'd spent nearly a decade trying to meet my mother-in-law's impossible standards. Tonight was just another Tuesday dinner, another attempt to bridge the gap between us, another failure. I think it's delicious, honey, my husband James said, reaching for seconds. But even his support couldn't erase the sting of Margaret's words or the way she now pushed food around her plate like a child avoiding vegetables. You know Olivia, James's cousin's wife, she made the most extraordinary coq au vin last week. The sauce was perfectly reduced, the mushrooms imported from France. Margaret paused, examining a piece of carrot as if it had personally offended her. But then, she trained at Le Cordon Bleu. Not everyone can achieve that level of sophistication. I bit my tongue, resisting the urge to remind her that Olivia's perfectly reduced sauce had come from a jar. I'd seen the empty container in her recycling bin. But starting an argument wouldn't help. It never did. More wine, Margaret? I offered instead, reaching for the bottle. She covered her glass with her hand. No, thank you. I find this vintage a bit common. James, darling, you remember the wonderful Bordeaux we had at the club last week? That was a proper wine. James shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Mom, please. But Margaret was on a roll now. You know, Sarah, if you're interested, I could recommend some cooking classes. Nothing too advanced, of course, just something to help you grasp the basics of proper cuisine. The community college offers some lovely beginner courses. I stood up, gathering plates with shaking hands. 7 years of these weekly dinners, 7 years of subtle jabs and not so subtle criticism. Each time I told myself it wouldn't hurt, and each time it did. In the kitchen, I could still hear Margaret's voice carrying from the dining room. James, sweetheart, I worry about you. A man in your position needs to maintain certain standards. The partners at your firm, they have expectations. I ran water in the sink, trying to drown out her words. James was a successful attorney, and according to Margaret, that meant everything in his life, including his wife, needed to reflect a certain image. An image I apparently couldn't live up to. Sarah? James's voice behind me made me jump. Mom's leaving. She has a headache. Of course she did. She always developed a mysterious ailment when served food that didn't meet her standards. I dried my hands and followed James to the door, plastering on a polite smile. Thank you for coming, Margaret, I said, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. She air-kissed my cheek, her perfume overwhelming. Thank you for trying, dear. Oh, and about Thanksgiving next week, I think it's best if we host at our house. No need to strain yourself. After she left, James pulled me into a hug. I'm sorry about Mom. You know how she gets. I did know. But something about tonight felt different. Maybe it was the way she dismissed my cooking despite the hours I'd spent preparing it. Maybe it was the condescending offer of cooking classes, or maybe, just maybe, it was her assumption that she'd be hosting Thanksgiving again. I want to host Thanksgiving this year, I said suddenly, surprising even myself. James pulled back, looking concerned. Sarah, you know how Mom is about holidays. She's hosted Thanksgiving for 20 years. And every year we sit at her table while she reminds everyone that her turkey is award-winning. Her cranberry sauce is made from berries she personally selected, and her pumpkin pie recipe has been in the family for generations. I took a deep breath. I want a chance, James, one chance to show I can do this. He hesitated, and I could see him mentally calculating his mother's reaction. Mom will be upset. Mom is always upset about something I do. At least this time, it'll be for something I choose. I met his eyes. I need this, James, please. He was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Okay, but you know she'll be difficult about it. I smiled, already forming a plan. Oh, I'm counting on it. That night, after James fell asleep, I sat at our kitchen table with my grandmother's recipe box open in front of me. Margaret wasn't the only one with family recipes and traditions. My grandmother had been a chef at one of Chicago's finest restaurants in the 1960s, breaking barriers as one of the few women in professional kitchens at the time. She taught me everything she knew, not just about cooking, but about life. The secret, she used to say, isn't in the ingredients, it's in the love you put into the meal. But, she'd add with a wink, excellent ingredients certainly don't hurt. I opened my laptop and began to plan. If Margaret wanted sophistication, I'd give her sophistication, but it would be on my terms, blending my grandmother's cherished recipes with my own modern twists. I had 9 days until Thanksgiving. 9 days to prove that I belonged at this family's table. My phone buzzed. A text from Margaret. "Darling, I've already ordered the turkey from that lovely farm in Vermont. No need to worry about it. We'll eat at 4, as always." I smiled, screenshotting the message to add to my collection. Let her think she was still in control. For once, I had a secret ingredient she wasn't expecting: determination. I opened my grandmother's most treasured recipe, the one she'd made me promise never to share. When the time is right, she'd said, "You'll know when to use this." Looking at Margaret's text, I knew the time was now. "Sorry, Margaret," I whispered to myself, "but this Thanksgiving is going to be a little different." The next week was a whirlwind of preparation. I took 3 days off work, much to Margaret's vocal disapproval. "Really, Sarah, in our family we believe in a strong work ethic." Every night after my shifts at the pediatric clinic, I tested recipes, perfecting each element of the meal. Margaret's attempts to undermine me were relentless. First came the daily calls to James. "Darling, are you sure Sarah can handle this? Remember the disaster at Easter with that overcooked ham?" Then the helpful suggestions. I could send over my caterer's number. No shame in admitting you need help, dear. But her crowning move came 3 days before Thanksgiving when she showed up unannounced at our door. "Sarah, dear," she said, breezing past me into the kitchen with a large shopping bag. "I brought a few essential items. Can't have Thanksgiving without proper serving pieces." She began unpacking, each item a subtle criticism. "Crystal gravy boat, much more elegant than that ceramic one you have. Proper silver serving spoons, I noticed yours are rather basic. Oh, and proper wine glasses. Those everyday ones simply won't do." I watched her arrange her items on my counter, each placement precise and pointed. "Thank you, Margaret, but I've already planned everything." She paused, examining a water spot on one of my existing wine glasses. "Have you? Because I took the liberty of checking your grocery delivery order. James gave me the password, hope you don't mind, and I noticed some concerning choices. Frozen pearl onions, store-bought stock. In our family, I haven't placed my grocery order yet." I cut in, my voice steady despite my racing heart. It was a lie. I placed the order weeks ago, using a different account she didn't know about. Oh, she seemed momentarily thrown off but recovered quickly. "Well, I'll send you my supplier list. They're quite exclusive, but I'm sure they'll make an exception if you mention my name." After she left, I surveyed my kitchen. Her crystal and silver gleamed accusingly among my carefully chosen items. For a moment, doubt crept in. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was in over my head. Then I noticed she'd moved my grandmother's recipe box to make room for her serving pieces. I picked it up, running my fingers over the worn edges. Inside was everything I needed, not just recipes, but strength. My grandmother had faced far worse than a critical mother-in-law, and she'd done it with grace and skill. The next morning, my real grocery delivery arrived, not from Margaret's exclusive suppliers, but from small local farms and markets I'd carefully sourced. The turkey had been raised on a family farm just outside the city. The vegetables were from the farmer's market, where I'd built relationships with vendors over years of early morning shopping. The spices came from a tiny shop owned by an elderly couple who taught me about blending flavors. I began my preparations in earnest. The turkey needed 3 days of careful brining in my grandmother's secret mixture. The cranberry sauce required time to develop its complex flavors. Each element was planned with precision, each recipe tested and perfected. Margaret called twice more that day. The first time was to remind me about place settings. The Crawfords will be joining us. They're very particular about proper table settings. The second was to express concern about my chosen menu. "Are you sure you want to attempt something so ambitious?" I let her words wash over me, focusing instead on the task at hand. My hands moved with confidence, muscle memory from years of cooking alongside my grandmother taking over. The kitchen filled with aromas that transported me back to childhood holidays, watching my grandmother work her magic. The day before Thanksgiving, my sister Katie came over to help. She took one look at my detailed preparation list and whistled. "You're really going all out, sis. Is this about proving something to Her Majesty?" I smiled, up to my elbows in herb butter for the turkey. "No, it's about proving something to myself." Katie nodded, understanding in her eyes. She'd been there through all of Margaret's criticisms, all the subtle digs and not-so-subtle dismissals. "Well, let's show her what the Williams women can do." We worked through the evening, preparing everything that could be done ahead. The pies were baked, not just pumpkin, but my grandmother's secret maple bourbon pecan and a spiced apple that had won ribbons at county fairs. The cranberry sauce was perfect, the stuffing was prepped, and the turkey was ready for its final preparations. Around midnight, another text from Margaret. "Darling, don't forget to set the table tonight. These things take time to do properly. I can come over early to rearrange if needed." I looked at my dining room where the table was already set, but not with Margaret's crystal and silver. Instead, I'd used my grandmother's china, simple, elegant pieces that told a story of family dinners and holiday gatherings. Each plate held memories of laughter and love, of lessons learned in that Chicago kitchen. The centerpiece wasn't some elaborate floral arrangement from Margaret's preferred florist. Instead, handmade wreaths of fresh herbs and dried flowers created a runner down the table's center, their subtle fragrance filling the room. Candles in my grandmother's old holders would provide warm light, and at each place setting, a small card waited to share the story behind each dish. Katie wrapped an arm around my shoulders, surveying our work. "Think she'll appreciate any of this?" I thought about Margaret's likely reaction, the raised eyebrows, the subtle sighs, the careful selection of criticisms wrapped in politeness. Probably not. But for the first time, I don't care. This isn't about her anymore. After Katie left, I sat alone in my dining room, surrounded by the results of our hard work. Tomorrow would either be a triumph or a disaster, but either way, it would be mine. I picked up my phone and typed a response to Margaret. "Everything is ready. Dinner will be served at 3. Can't wait to share it with the family." Then I added something I'd never dared before. "And Margaret, please leave the crystal at home. We have everything we need." Thanksgiving morning dawned clear and crisp. I was up before sunrise, moving through my kitchen with quiet confidence. The turkey went into the oven at precisely 10 a.m., already fragrant with herbs and my grandmother's special butter blend. Each dish came together exactly as planned, years of practice guiding my hands. At 2:45, James peeked into the kitchen. "Mom just texted. They're 5 minutes away." He paused, taking in the array of dishes. "Sarah, this looks incredible." "Thanks." I wiped my hands on my apron, the one my grandmother had given me, now splattered with the evidence of a morning's work. "Could you light the candles?" Margaret's arrival was heralded by the click of heels on our front walk. I took a deep breath, smoothed my dress, and opened the door before she could ring the bell. "Welcome," I said, genuinely smiling. "Happy Thanksgiving." She stood there, arms full of what appeared to be serving dishes, looking slightly thrown by my calm demeanor. Behind her, my father-in-law, Robert, offered an apologetic shrug. "Sarah, dear," Margaret started, trying to step inside with her dishes. "I brought a few backup options, just in case." "That won't be necessary," I said firmly, not moving from the doorway. "The meal is prepared and ready to be served. But thank you for thinking of us." For perhaps the first time in our relationship, Margaret was speechless. She allowed Robert to take the dishes back to their car while I led her into the dining room. The table was a vision. Candlelight danced off the polished surfaces of my grandmother's china. The herb garlands filled the air with a subtle fragrance, and the place cards told silent stories of family history. Margaret stopped short, her carefully maintained composure slipping for just a moment. "This is," she began, then faltered. "Different from what you expected," I suggested gently. Other guests began arriving. James's sister Emily and her husband, the Crawfords, some family friends. Each one paused in the dining room doorway, taking in the scene. The comments started flowing. "Beautiful. So elegant. What amazing attention to detail." When I brought out the turkey, golden brown and perfumed with herbs, even Margaret couldn't find fault. The carved slices were moist and tender, exactly as my grandmother had taught me. Each side dish told its own story. The green beans with toasted almonds and preserved lemon, the sweet potatoes with a maple bourbon glaze, the stuffing rich with fresh herbs and wild mushrooms. Sarah, Emily said after her first bite, this is incredible. Where did you learn to cook like this? I noticed Margaret watching intently as I answered. From my grandmother. She was the head chef at the Drake in Chicago back in the 60s. Everything I know about cooking, about hosting, about making people feel welcome at a table, I learned from her. The Drake? Margaret's voice was quiet. In Chicago? I nodded, serving more gravy to Robert. Yes, she was one of the first women to run a high-end kitchen in the city. She always said food was about more than just ingredients. It was about bringing people together, about creating memories. Margaret was silent for a long moment, pushing food around her plate. Then, so quietly I almost missed it. I ate there once, in the 70s. It was one of the finest meals I've ever had. The conversation flowed. The wine was perfect, not from Margaret's supplier, but from a small vineyard I'd discovered. And when dessert was served, there were audible gasps of delight. Is this your grandmother's maple bourbon pecan pie? Robert asked, taking another bite. It's extraordinary. It is. I smiled. The recipe won her a James Beard Award in 1975. Margaret's fork clattered against her plate. Your grandmother was Eleanor Williams. The table fell silent as I nodded. Eleanor Williams was a legend in Chicago dining. Margaret said, her voice different now. I tried for years to replicate her pie recipe. No one ever came close. She looked down at her plate, then back at me, really seeing me, perhaps for the first time. And you learned from her? Everything I know, I said simply, including how to host a proper family dinner. The rest of the meal passed in a blur of conversation and laughter. As guests began to leave, each one thanked me with genuine warmth. The Crawfords, who, according to Margaret, were so particular, asked for my card, hoping to get my help planning their next dinner party. Finally, only Margaret and Robert remained. She lingered in the dining room while Robert helped James clear plates. Sarah, she said, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant. I believe I owe you an apology. I turned from where I was carefully wrapping leftover turkey. I've been difficult, she continued. I thought I knew what proper meant, what sophistication looked like. But this meal, this evening, it wasn't just about the food, was it? No, I agreed. It was about family, about tradition, about honoring the people who taught us and the memories we create together. She nodded slowly. Your grandmother taught you well, not just about cooking, but about grace. She paused. I don't suppose, would you consider teaching me some of her recipes? I smiled, thinking of my grandmother's words about knowing when the time was right. I'd like that, Margaret, though some recipes might have to remain family secrets. Of course, she said, then added with a small smile, but aren't we family? As they left, Margaret hugged me, a real hug, not her usual air kiss. Thank you, she whispered, for showing me what I'd been missing. Later that night, as James and I sat in our quiet house, he squeezed my hand. You did it, honey. You actually did it. I looked at my grandmother's recipe box, sitting proudly on our kitchen counter. No, I corrected him, we did it. All of us. That's what family is supposed to be about. The next morning, I received a text from Margaret. Thank you for a lovely Thanksgiving. Perhaps next week's dinner could be at our house. I'd love to learn more about your grandmother's cooking techniques. I smiled, typing my reply. I'll bring the recipes, and Margaret, thank you for being willing to learn something new. Sometimes the greatest traditions aren't the ones we inherit, but the ones we create together. My grandmother had known that all along.